Hey!
Oh, this is the fill plug?
Yeah!
Oh, you definitely fill plug.
Well, that's what I was saying, like... In the last episode, I rebuilt my shifter mechanism that was pretty worn out, and I discovered that I actually have no clue what I'm doing while I tried to change my transmission fluid for the first time. In this one, I'm going to try to tackle that transmission fluid change again, and move on to the rest of the fluids that I've been wanting to change before I really start driving this car. So in the last episode, I found it kind of scary to get under the car since I've never been under a car before. And in addition to that, I found it quite hard to identify the drain and fill plug that I need to open on the transmission. And even when I identified those plugs, it was quite hard to reach them with all the chassis bracing that was in the way. And as if that wasn't difficult enough, I found that I didn't even have the right sockets to open them when I finally figured out how to get my wrench in there. So this time I raised the car in the jack stand so I was a bit more comfortable being under it. I borrowed my roommate's headlamp so I can get a bit more light under there as I was looking around. And I bought a 24mm socket, which is the missing socket size that I need to open these plugs. So hopefully this time I can actually get them open and get the fluid changed. Yeah, no, I should have learned by now that it's never going to be that easy. So I found a guide on miata.net. It says I need to remove this shield so that I can get to the transmission. And it says it's pretty heavy, and it definitely looks heavy. So I'm not really looking forward to that. So I'm going to check if I can reach the bolts without doing that. Ah, no. But no, there's always got to be a problem, right? This little socket I have is a little too long, but this is the only one I could get yesterday. At this point, I was really starting to feel like I wouldn't be able to do a transmission fluid change myself. Because, you know, like, I've never worked on a car before. And then I had my brightest idea yet. Hey, Fide. By any chance, do you have a 24mm socket? Which was to call my neighbor who also works on cars. And not only did he have the correct socket I needed, he also brought me a few different lengths of breaker bars that helped a lot. It doesn't seem I'm about to take off this, yeah, but what I've learned is every time I try something, something goes wrong. Yeah. So my idea is, if I try less things, less goes wrong. But even then, it was still quite difficult to actually reach the bolts. I was starting on trying to open up the fill bolt first, because the exhaust is right there, which really doesn't leave you a lot of room. And then you can see how I keep bumping into the chassis bracing, which made it hard to actually fit a wrench in there. And even if you fit the wrench in there, you didn't really have much room to rotate it to start opening the bolt. Oh, I got it. And then finally, I got the bolt. Oh, it's turning. Nothing yet. It's definitely turning. Which at this point, I really was starting to where I wouldn't be able to do. Like, I'm just gonna drop it. I hope I put up. And then finally, I got the bolt open. The amount of relief that was going through my head right now was incredible. Yeah, I overfilled it. While struggling under the car, I was really starting to wonder if I had gotten way in over my head with trying to learn how to work on a car on my own. This is the fill plug that's... Oh, sorry. That's the fill plug.
Oh, this is the fill plug?
Yeah.
Oh, you definitely fill.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, I know I did. So all that fluid that came out right there was the brand new fluid that I had overfilled from the shifter turret. So once $50 of my brand new fluid drained out, I got started on trying to crack open the drain plug to let out the old fluid. Yeah, the bolt head is like, you see how the wrench is attached this way? This way. Oh. And that came out even easier. Hey! And at this point, I finally got some assurance that I might actually be able to do all this maintenance work myself. I cannot describe how good that feels that I finally got that open. I really was starting to think I'm gonna have to take it to a shop. That's perfect. I'm happy. So I did actually do a good amount of research on how to maintain a Miata before I bought one. And I was surprised to find how easy it was. And one of the main things that I learned was that some of the basic important work, like fluid and oil changes, are really not that complicated. It's just you just open the one bolt at the bottom to drain the old fluid, close that up, fill in the fluid from the top, and then close that top bolt. So yeah, I did feel like I was way in over my head, but I also knew exactly what work had to be done. So once I got those bolts open, which was the hardest part, I closed up the drain plug and I got started filling up the transmission from the fill plug with this pump here. Unfortunately, my camera battery died right as I was actually filling up the transmission, but it went in quite easy, and then I could finally close up the transmission and move on to my next task. I did it! Whew. Okay, so now no matter what I do, the car is finally at least drivable again. Nice. And with the transmission sealed up, I could finally check that the transmission felt right, start the car, put in a few gears, and everything seemed to work smoothly. Alright, next up, I'm gonna change my oil for the first time ever. So I got my drain pan ready, but this time I made sure I actually had the correct size socket before I got underneath the car and realized I didn't have the right tool for the job. I found the oil pan, I started opening it up, and I was surprised that it just opened. I thought it'd be so much more difficult like the transmission, but it was really nice to feel like I was able to consistently make progress now. I really felt like I was starting to get the hang of working on my car. While I let the last bit of the oil drain, I also got started pulling out the oil filter. All of the advice I found online told me to not even bother trying to reach the oil filter from the top of the engine bay since it's kind of an awkward position, but instead to take the passenger wheel off and reach the oil filter from that side, which worked beautifully. So then I got started putting in the new oil filter. I followed all the advice I found online to prep it by pouring in a little bit of oil and also like kind of lubing the edges of it with some oil, and then reinstalled it back in place. With the oil drained and the new oil filter in, I closed up the oil pan and got started filling up the oil. I was once again surprised how easy this is. I mean, I guess it makes sense, you're just pouring in oil from the top, but after the amount of pain that I went through with the transmission, both draining it and filling it, I'd mentally prepared myself for the oil change to be just as difficult. But no, it went by pretty easy. So after a quick snack, the only thing left to do was check that it ran fine. Just like the transmission, I didn't really know what I should be looking for, just that everything seemed to be running smoothly and just as it had been before. So I changed the oil now. I'm realizing now that I should have probably changed the oil before I changed the transmission fluid because it's so much easier and I would have known a little bit more. But on the other side, now that I did the transmission fluid first, changing the oil was surprisingly a piece of cake. The only thing is, I don't know which Miatas, but at least the NB, the oil filter's hard to reach. And taking off the passenger side wheel and reaching right in here got me a pretty nice grip on that black oil filter right there. So that made it pretty easy, not as bad as I was worried it would be since everyone has talked about how much of a pain that is. But yeah, I filled up the oil, no leaks, the engine runs fine, and the oil pressure is pretty much dead even. So at least now I'm more comfortable driving it a little harder now that the main fluids have been changed. So with my first ever oil change completed and the new oil filter in, I reinstalled the passenger wheel, and then I also made sure to clean up some of my tools that I had kind of dropped into the drain pan of oil like a complete dum-dum. And then I was ready to move on to the diff. And wow, this day was really going good. After struggling so much getting started on this car with the shifter and the transmission, I was able to come back the next day and finish up the transmission fluid change, do my first oil change, change the oil filter. So why not wrap it up with one of the last fluids, the differential fluid. Yeah, no, that did not go according to plan at all. That fill plug in the differential was completely rusted in place. I tried using a breaker bar, I tried using my normal wrench, I tried using my body weight. You can see here, putting my body weight pretty much onto the bar until it completely shot off and injured my hand. I really thought I was starting to get the hang of working on my car. This one really actually hurt quite a bit, and then it started bleeding later that day. But I guess that's how it goes. And before you tell me, okay, well, if it's rusted shut, you should be blasting it with some penetrating fluid. Believe me, I doused that thing in penetrating fluid. I even left it doused in penetrating fluid for an hour or two. Came back and tried again. Nothing. So when it became pretty clear that just wrenching it open wasn't going to work, I tried a few of the more creative ideas that I found online. Hammering at the bolts to try and get the rust to break loose. Trying a couple of different positions maybe to open it up. Dousing it in even more penetrating fluid. But nothing was working. That bolt was firmly in place. But at the same time, it was starting to reassure my decision to do all these fluid changes, because this was starting to make me think that this bolt had possibly never been opened, or at least never been opened in a long time. When all of that failed, I started getting even more creative. I tried attaching an adjustable wrench to the bolt and then hammering that as hard as I could in the limited space, but no luck. I tried tightening and then loosening the bolt with some advice from Fide. That didn't seem to work either. And then when all of that failed, I got really creative. I tried to attach a pair of vice grips to the bolt and then use my body weight to yank a rope to pull it open, but that just wasn't working either. Alright, so after probably an hour of working on the differential, I have officially given up. I've already hurt my finger really bad, and I've been fighting it with penetrating oil and a breaker bar, and also hammered it, and then also tried taking a pair of vice grip and then tying a string to it and pulling on that, but no luck. Man, I was really exhausted at this point. But I'm still pretty happy with all the progress I made today, given that I know nothing. So I'm gonna go and give it a test drive. I tried not to let that failure get to me. After all, I had still at least successfully changed my transmission fluid, my oil filter, and my engine oil all for the first time. So it was still a very productive and successful day. So with the car drivable again, I put the car back on the ground and took it for a test drive, which put that smile back on my face pretty quickly. So all in all, that was actually one of the most productive and rewarding days I'd had in a while. It was after this day that I was really starting to fall in love with working on my own car. Now it's finally starting to understand why so many people spend so much time and money on their cars and at the same time get so much fulfillment out of them. So it was really nice to experience that for myself and bond with my own car. So in the next episode, I'm going to take a bit of a break from the mechanical work on the car and instead focus on cosmetically upgrading it, mainly learning how to properly detail a car, as in not just wash the car but also clay bar and wax, and then pull out the inside seats, clean the entire interior, so that I can finally get the car to a clean state that I want and start to make it actually feel like my own.